My husband ruined my home and sanity with his beehive obsession, so I sent him packing. Now, a year later, he's trying to convince me to fund his new hobby, but I told him to buzz off. I went on vacation for 3 weeks with some friends and left my husband at home because he didn't want to go and had to watch our dog. I came home yesterday and found out that he bought some honeycombs from our friend's father. He has been sitting in the living room just eating the honeycomb, like the whole thing with all the beeswax and bits in it. I told him it wasn't healthy, but he said the wax is edible, and he's eaten 6 of them. So, about 3 weeks ago, I flew to South Korea for a vacation with friends there. My husband didn't want to go and said he'd be fine staying home and watching the house and dog. I trusted him because he's a 40-year-old adult man, and I assumed he'd be able to feed himself like a sane person despite possessing the cooking ability of a cactus. I was wrong. I should have dragged him and the dog to another country. What my husband decided to do during his 3 weeks without me was absurd. I would have been happier if he cheated on me instead. He ordered nothing but Taco Bell through DoorDash after he somehow broke my stove by cooking an entire 15-pound bag of red lentils all at once. Then he didn't bother to get a bowl for his lentils. He just ate them straight from the pot, stuffed the pot into the fridge, and broke one of the shelves inside it. Now realizing his mistake, he ordered terrible tacos for the remaining 2 weeks. Also, for some reason, he bought a bunch of honeycombs from one of our friend's fathers and decided those made a good snack. He has eaten nothing but beeswax and honey for the last few days because he's some weird alien in a human disguise. Honeycombs give you gas, and Taco Bell gives you gas. So now it's today, and I'm awoken by what sounds like someone revving a motorcycle in my bedroom, followed by the stench of the fiery pits of hell itself. It's 5:30 in the morning. He gets up and uses the toilet as I'm opening the windows in a poor attempt to ventilate the house, but it's too late. He doesn't even have a solid poop. It's just 10 minutes of gas, like 20 seconds of non-stop farts followed by a huge gasp of air, and then another 20 seconds of gas. By this time, the dog had hidden under my couch because it didn't know what those loud honking noises were and feared for its safety. I am considering joining it, but I will continue to open every window in my house. It's 62 degrees out and windy. The wind just blows the fart smell around the house. My husband has left the bathroom and has walked upstairs. It sounds like there's a small 2-stroke engine in his pants. I can't take it anymore, so I scream that I will get breakfast at the diner and leave him. I bring the dog with me because the dog followed me out. After all, it also doesn't want to be here right now. Update. It's 9 o'clock, and my husband texted me to tell me to rent a carpet cleaner from Dollar General because he trusted a fart and shat all over the living room floor. It's going to be one of those days. Update 1. It's 10:23, and I've returned home after a lovely day of walking my dog around the park, getting coffee, renting a carpet cleaner, and tuning my motorcycle to a house that smells like Febreze and Lysol. I took so long screwing around that my husband had time to harass our neighbors and borrow a spot-bought carpet cleaner that didn't clean our carpet. I gave him the instructions for a carpet cleaner I rented for a stupid amount of money from Dollar General, and I'm now locked in our bedroom. He's allowed in when the house is fixed, and he's no longer filled with more gas than the Hindenburg. Update 2. If I don't survive, 11:40. I can't hear the carpet cleaner anymore, but I can still hear the horns of Jericho as my husband continues to fart. He's smoking too, and the pot smoke and farts are leaching into the bedroom where I'm unsafely locked inside. Oh yay. Update 3. I survived the gas attack. I fell asleep and woke up to a bazillion comments on this post. A dog that also shat on the floor, and a husband that is now gas-free but had been on the toilet for so long his legs went to sleep, so he fell off the bathroom and ripped the towel rack off the wall. He did try to put the towel rack back, but now I need to buy drywall anchors because if you look at it funny, it just falls off again. He says, I'm never doing that again, but he'll probably do something similar in 6 months because I'm on the Truman Show. Update 4. So apparently you can't digest beeswax, so my husband has turned into a human shotgun that's entirely powered by gas. He says it comes in waves, so it's gas, then beeswax gas, followed by beeswax. I think he ate the entire beehive. Final update. My husband gave himself food poisoning from all of the raw honeycombs. He finally came to his senses after I sent him on a fridge shelf replacement adventure by himself and told him he couldn't return until he found one. It took him 13 hours, and he had to leave the state because we had a weird Samsung smart fridge. So he got the shelf back and hopped back into his car, which he had been farting in all day long in 90-degree heat and almost bombed from the smell. Then he had to drive 6 hours with all the windows down, stop to buy Depends because he still had food poisoning, and finally make it home to apologize for eating like a 14-year-old boy and breaking my kitchen and trust. He also found a replacement barbecue cover and anchors for the towel bar he destroyed. I stared at the drywall anchors in his hand and grabbed them before he could lose them somewhere. The man had somehow managed to destroy half our house in 3 weeks, and now he wanted to fix things. I pointed at the bathroom door and told him to go shower off whatever nightmare combination of honey, beeswax, and Taco Bell was still clinging to him. And while he showered, I started making a list of everything that needed fixing. The stove, the fridge shelf he'd already replaced, the towel rack, the carpet that still smelled faintly of disaster despite the industrial cleaning. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor asking if everything was okay. I typed back that we were fine, just dealing with some stomach issues. The shower turned off, and my husband emerged looking sheepish. He grabbed the anchors and headed to the bathroom to fix the towel rack. I heard drilling sounds, followed by a crash and some creative cursing. The towel rack had fallen again, this time taking a chunk of drywall with it. I walked to the bathroom doorway and found him sitting on the floor, surrounded by drywall dust and holding the towel rack like a defeated warrior with his sword. The hole in the wall was now twice as big as before. He looked up at me with those puppy dog eyes that usually worked, but after the honeycomb incident, I was immune. I told him to stop touching things and just sit on the couch. He shuffled past me, and I noticed he was walking funny, probably from spending half the day on the toilet. The dog followed him, keeping a safe distance as if my husband might explode again at any moment. I called my brother-in-law Robert, who actually knew how to fix things. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear him trying not to laugh as I explained the situation. He said he'd come over tomorrow with his tools and help repair the damage. I thanked him and hung up, then noticed my husband had disappeared from the couch. I found him in the garage, standing in front of a cardboard box I didn't recognize. Inside were 3 more honeycombs, still dripping with honey. He said he'd bought extras because they were such a good deal. I grabbed the box and marched it straight to the garbage can outside, ignoring his protests about wasting money. Back inside, I started opening windows again because the house still smelled like a combination of cleaning products and human disaster. My husband sat on the couch, looking miserable. The dog had finally decided it was safe enough to curl up in its bed, though it kept one eye open, watching him suspiciously. I made myself a sandwich and pointedly didn't offer him any. He could figure out his own food situation that didn't involve raw bee products or fast food. He mumbled something about being hungry, and I reminded him that he'd spent 2 weeks eating nothing but Taco Bell and honeycomb. His stomach made a noise that sounded like a dying whale, and he clutched it dramatically. The afternoon dragged on with him alternating between sitting very still and making sudden dashes to the bathroom. Each time he returned looking paler and more defeated. I almost felt bad for him, but then I remembered the morning's wake-up call and my sympathy evaporated. My phone rang, and it was my friend Catherine, whose father had sold him the honeycombs. She was calling to apologize, saying she had no idea he bought so many or that he'd actually eat them like that. Her father thought he was buying them for some kind of craft project. I told her it wasn't her fault that my husband had the decision-making skills of a toddler. As evening approached, I started making dinner for myself. The broken stove meant I had to use the microwave and toaster oven, which limited my options. My husband watched me heat up leftover soup with the expression of a starving Victorian orphan. I ignored him and took my bowl to the dining room. He tried to get up to join me but had to sit back down quickly, his face going green. Another dash to the bathroom followed, and I heard him muttering about never eating honeycomb again. The dog looked at me as if to say it had tried to warn us about his poor choices. After dinner, I called a repair service about the stove. The earliest they could come was next week, which meant more creative meal solutions. I made a mental note to hide my credit card so my husband couldn't order any more delivery food while I figured out our kitchen situation. He emerged from the bathroom looking like he'd aged 5 years in one day. His phone buzzed, and he showed me me a text from his brother asking if we needed anything. Apparently, Robert had already spread the word about the honeycomb incident. I could practically feel my husband's embarrassment radiating off him in waves. As bedtime approached, I made it clear he was sleeping on the couch. The bedroom still needed to air out from the morning's chemical warfare, and I wasn't taking any chances on a repeat performance. He nodded meekly and grabbed a pillow and blanket from the closet. I checked on him one last time before heading to bed. He was curled up on the couch, looking pathetic. The dog had taken pity on him and was lying on the floor nearby, though still maintaining a safe distance. I reminded him that Robert would be here tomorrow to fix the towel rack and told him not to touch anything else. In the bedroom, I opened my laptop and started researching adult supervision services, only half joking. How someone could make such spectacularly bad decisions in just 3 weeks was beyond me. The honeycomb thing was weird enough, but combining it with 2 weeks of Taco Bell was like he was trying to destroy his digestive system. I could hear him getting up periodically throughout the night, each trip to the bathroom accompanied by groans and what sounded like prayers to various deities. The dog had given up and retreated to its crate, probably the smartest member of our household at this point. The next morning came too soon. I woke up to find my husband already awake, sitting at the kitchen table and staring at a glass of water like it might bite him. He said he was afraid to put anything in his stomach, which was probably the first sensible thought he'd had in weeks. Robert arrived around noon with his toolbox and a smirk that told me he'd been laughing about this all morning. My husband shuffled to answer the door, still clutching his stomach like it might betray him at any moment. I watched from the kitchen as Robert surveyed the damage to the bathroom wall, shaking his head and muttering something about how his brother had outdone himself this time. While Robert worked on the towel rack, I noticed my husband had disappeared again. I found him in the garage, rummaging through boxes on the shelves. When I asked what he was doing, he mumbled something about looking for antacids. I didn't buy it for a second, especially when I saw him quickly shove something behind his back. I demanded he show me what he was hiding. After a brief standoff, he reluctantly produced a beekeeping magazine. My stomach dropped. He started rambling about how eating the honeycomb had given him a new appreciation for bees, how fascinating they were, how maybe we could start a small hive in the backyard. I snatched the magazine from his hands and told him absolutely not. Robert finished fixing the towel rack and came to find us in the garage. He took one look at the beekeeping magazine in my hand and burst out laughing. Apparently my husband had texted him earlier asking about local beekeeping supplies. I glared at both of them while my husband tried to explain that it would be educational, that fresh honey would be amazing, that bees were good for the environment. I marched back inside, leaving them in the garage. The dog followed me, clearly the only one in this house with any sense. I started cleaning up the kitchen, trying to ignore the sound of my husband and Robert discussing hive construction in the garage. When they finally came inside, Robert gave me an apologetic look and said he'd tried to talk sense into him. After Robert left, I confronted my husband about his sudden bee obsession. He insisted it was just a passing interest, that he was still feeling sick from the honeycomb incident. But I caught him later that afternoon watching beekeeping videos on YouTube, taking notes on his phone. When I walked into the room, he quickly switched to a cooking video, as if that was any more believable. The next few days passed in relative peace. My husband's digestive system slowly returned to normal, and he started eating regular food again. The stove repair technician came and fixed our appliance, though he gave me strange looks when I explained how it broke. I thought maybe we were past the worst of it. I was wrong. I came home from grocery shopping to find my husband in the backyard with a tape measure, marking out a section near the garden shed. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was planning where to put a small greenhouse for vegetables, but I saw the beekeeping supply catalog sticking out of his back pocket. That evening, I called his sister to vent. She laughed and told me this was typical for him. Apparently, when they were kids, he'd become obsessed with raising rabbits after visiting a petting zoo. Their parents had found him trying to convert their basement into a rabbit warren. She said he'd always been like this, latching onto random interests with disturbing intensity. I hung up feeling both validated and concerned. The dog seemed to sense my mood and curled up next to me on the couch. My husband emerged from his home office where he'd been working all evening. I could see the browser history on his laptop when he set it down, all beekeeping websites. The next morning, I woke up to find him gone. His car was missing, and he'd left a note saying he went to get breakfast. But when he returned 2 hours later, I noticed pine needles on his shoes and sawdust on his jeans. He claimed he'd stopped at the park, but I knew he'd been at the lumberyard. I decided to do some investigating. While he showered, I checked our joint credit card statement online. There were several recent charges to online retailers I didn't recognize. When I searched the company names, they all sold beekeeping equipment. He'd already spent over $300 on supplies. When I confronted him with the evidence, he tried to play it off as research for a friend, but I knew better. He eventually admitted he'd ordered just a few things to learn more about beekeeping. He promised he wasn't actually going to get bees, just wanted to understand the process better. I didn't believe him for a second. Over the next week, packages started arriving. Beekeeping books, protective gear, hive tools. Each time my husband would intercept the delivery before I could see it, squirreling the items away somewhere. I found some hidden in the garage, others in the garden shed. It was like living with a very poorly organized spy. I tried talking to our friends about it, hoping they might help me talk sense into him, but to my surprise, several of them thought it sounded like a great idea. Our friend Tom even offered to help him build hive boxes, saying his grandfather had been a beekeeper. I felt like I was losing my mind. Catherine called to check in, still feeling guilty about her father selling him the honeycomb that started this whole mess. When I told her about the beekeeping obsession, she went quiet. Then she admitted that my husband had already contacted her father about buying an established hive. Her father had refused, saying he needed to see proper setup and permits first. I found my husband that evening in the garden shed, which he'd started converting into what he called a honey house. He'd installed shelves and was organizing his growing collection of beekeeping supplies. When I demanded he stop, he accused me of being unsupportive of his interests. We had our first real fight in years. He stormed off to stay at Robert's house for the night. I spent the evening researching local ordinances about beekeeping, hoping to find some legal reason to shut this down. The dog stayed close to me, sensing the tension. I discovered our city did allow backyard beekeeping, but with strict requirements about hive placement and neighbor notifications. The next day, my husband returned with Robert, who tried to mediate between us. He suggested maybe my husband could take a beekeeping class first, learn properly before jumping in. My husband eagerly agreed, and I reluctantly accepted this compromise, hoping the class would either satisfy his curiosity or show him how much work it really was. But the class only made things worse. He came home from the first session practically buzzing with excitement, full of facts about queen bees and honey production. He'd made friends with other aspiring beekeepers and joined their online forum. Our dinner conversations became lectures about colony collapse disorder and the importance of native pollinators. I started finding bee-related items everywhere. Books on my nightstand, documentary DVDs by the TV, honey varieties in the pantry. He'd even bought the dog a collar with little bee patterns on it. When I complained, he said I was being dramatic, that lots of people had hobbies. But this felt different, more intense. One morning, I discovered he'd been getting up early to work on the shed conversion. He'd installed ventilation and was building extraction equipment. When I asked how he was paying for all this, he admitted he'd been selling things online, his gaming console, some tools, even his watch collection, all for his bee obsession. I reached out to his siblings for help. They agreed to stage what they called an intervention, but when they arrived, my husband had prepared a whole presentation about the benefits of beekeeping. He had charts about honey profits, environmental impact studies, even testimonials from other urban beekeepers. His brother just shook his head and laughed. The situation escalated when I found him on the phone with someone, speaking in hushed tones. When I asked who it was, he said it was just a work call, but I later discovered he'd been talking to a bee supplier 2 states away, trying to arrange an under-the-table hive purchase since local suppliers required proof of proper setup. I started documenting everything, the receipts, the shed modifications, the secretive phone calls. I wasn't sure why, but something told me I might need evidence of this madness. The dog had taken to sleeping in my room, away from the garage where my husband spent most of his time now. Then came the day I found him in the backyard with Tom, building what was clearly a hive stand. They'd told me me they were fixing the fence, but there it was, a wooden platform designed to hold beehives. When I confronted them, Tom apologized and quickly left. My husband just shrugged and said he was preparing for someday. I called a family meeting with his parents and siblings. I laid out everything that had been happening, hoping they'd see how out of control this had gotten. His mother admitted he'd called her asking to borrow money for an investment opportunity. His father said he'd noticed charges on their shared business credit card for bee supplies. The confrontation didn't go as planned. My husband turned it around, claiming I was trying to control him, that I'd never supported his interests. He brought up how I'd gone to South Korea without him, how I'd left him alone for 3 weeks. Some family members actually started taking his side, saying maybe beekeeping would be good for him. I felt isolated and frustrated. Even some of our mutual friends thought I was overreacting. They'd say things like, at least he's not gambling, or it could be worse. But they didn't see the obsessive behavior, the financial drain, the way he'd completely transformed our garden shed without discussing it with me. One evening I came home to find a truck in our driveway. My husband and 2 men were unloading white wooden boxes, beehives. My heart sank. He'd actually done it. When I demanded an explanation, he said they were just empty hives, that he was storing them for a friend. But I recognized one of the men as the bee supplier from 2 states away. The next morning, I woke up to a strange humming sound. Looking out the window, I saw my husband in a full bee suit, installing what was clearly an active hive in our backyard. He'd done it in the early morning, thinking I wouldn't notice. But the sound of thousands of bees is hard to miss. I ran outside in my pajamas, demanding he remove them immediately. He refused, saying the bees were already settled and moving them would be dangerous. Our neighbor, Mrs. Chen, came out to see what the commotion was about. When she saw the hive, her face went pale. Her grandson was severely allergic to bee stings. The situation spiraled from there. Mrs. Chen called other neighbors who called the city. My husband insisted he had the right to keep bees, that he'd followed all the regulations, but he hadn't notified the neighbors as required, hadn't gotten the proper permits. He thought he could establish the hives first and handle paperwork later. By afternoon, we had a city inspector at our door. My husband tried to charm him, offering fresh honey and explaining the environmental benefits, but the inspector was unmoved. He cited multiple violations and gave us 48 hours to remove the hives or face fines. My husband was devastated, but also defiant. That night, he accused me of calling the city, of sabotaging his dreams. I hadn't made the call, but he didn't believe me. He started ranting about how I'd never understood him, how I was standing in the way of his happiness. The dog hid under the bed as his voice grew louder and more agitated. I tried to reason with him, pointing out the legal issues, the neighbors' concerns, the fact that he'd lied to me repeatedly, but he just kept deflecting, making me the villain in his beekeeping saga. He even suggested we should move to a more bee-friendly neighborhood, as if uprooting our entire life for his week-old obsession was reasonable. The next day, while he was at his beekeeping class, I took action. I called a professional bee removal service and arranged for them to safely relocate the hive. I also changed the locks on the garden shed and put all his beekeeping supplies in the garage. When he came home and discovered what I'd done, his reaction was explosive. He called me controlling, said I'd destroyed his dreams. He threatened to leave, to find someone who would support his interests. I stood my ground, reminding him of the honeycomb incident, the broken stove, the destroyed bathroom, and now this. His pattern of destructive obsessions was clear, and I wasn't enabling it anymore. He slammed the door and drove off to Robert's house again. I spent the evening packing up the remaining bee supplies into boxes, labeling each one with a receipt total. The dog watched me work, occasionally sniffing at the smoker and backing away with a sneeze. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with texts from mutual friends. My husband had apparently been messaging everyone, claiming I'd gone behind his back and destroyed his property. Some believed him. Others asked for my side of the story. I didn't respond to any of them. The next morning, I woke up to find my husband's car in the driveway, but no sign of him. I checked the garage and found him asleep on the floor next to the boxes of bee supplies, clutching a bee suit like a security blanket. The dog nudged him with its nose, and he stirred, looking disoriented. I made coffee while he stumbled into the house. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the boxes I'd packed. Without saying anything, he started going through them, checking each item against the receipts I'd attached. His face grew paler with each price tag. My phone rang. It was Catherine's father, asking if we still needed the bees removed. I told him they were already gone, and he sounded relieved. He mentioned that my husband had been calling him daily, sometimes multiple times, asking about different bee breeds and honey yields. He'd started screening the calls. While I was on the phone, my husband disappeared again. I found him in the backyard, standing where the hive had been. He was holding his phone, taking pictures of the empty space. I watched from the window as he walked around the yard, pointing at different spots and mumbling to himself. Robert showed up unannounced, looking tired. He said my husband had kept him up all night talking about bees and how I didn't understand his vision. Robert had finally told him to go home and talk to me like an adult. My husband had driven around for hours instead before sleeping in our garage. I showed Robert the boxes of supplies and the receipts. He whistled at the total, over $2,000 now. He helped me load everything into his truck, saying he'd store it at his place until my husband came to his senses. My husband watched from the doorway but didn't try to stop us. That afternoon, Mrs. Chen knocked on our door with her grandson. The boy had an EpiPen in his hand, and she explained how terrified they'd been about the bees. My husband actually looked ashamed for the first time. He apologized to them, and I could see something shift in his expression. After they left, he sat on the couch with a dog. I joined them, keeping space between us. He started talking about his childhood, how his parents never let him have pets or hobbies. I'd heard these stories before, but this time I noticed how he used them to justify his current behavior. I pulled out my laptop and showed him the documentation I'd been keeping. Screenshots of purchases, photos of the shed modifications, records of the lies he told. He stared at the screen, seeing weeks of deception laid out in chronological order. The dog whined and pressed against his leg. He tried to argue at first, saying I was making him look worse than he was, but the evidence was clear. The secret purchases, the hidden supplies, the way he'd manipulated our friends. Tom had even sent me messages apologizing, saying my husband had told him I'd approved the hive stand construction. My husband's phone rang. It was his boss, asking why he'd missed 3 days of work. He'd been calling in sick to attend beekeeping workshops and visit apiaries. As he stammered out excuses, I realized this went deeper than I thought. The dog retreated to its crate, sensing the tension building. After he hung up, I gave him an ultimatum. He could get help for his obsessive behavior, or he could find somewhere else to live. I wasn't going through another honeycomb incident or whatever his next fixation would be. He accused me of being dramatic, but I pointed at the still damaged bathroom wall. He stormed out again, but this time I didn't chase him. I called a locksmith and had the locks changed on the house. Then I called his sister and told her what was happening. She wasn't surprised. She mentioned their uncle had the same pattern, jumping from obsession to obsession, leaving chaos in his wake. 2 days passed without contact. I focused on getting the house back in order. The stove was finally properly repaired. The bathroom wall patched correctly by a professional. The lingering smell of the honeycomb disaster had finally faded. The dog seemed more relaxed without the constant tension. Then packages started arriving again, but this time they were returns. My husband had apparently been sending back the bee supplies he ordered online. The refund notifications popped up in our joint account. It was a start, but I knew better than to get hopeful. He showed up on the 3rd day with his brother and sister. They'd staged their own intervention, taking him to see their uncle who'd lost his marriage to similar behavior. My husband looked exhausted, but clearer somehow. He asked if we could talk. I let them in, but kept the new keys. His siblings stayed as witnesses while he apologized, not just for the bees, but for the pattern. He admitted he'd already been researching aquaponic systems before I'd shut down the bee operation. The cycle would have continued. He agreed to see a therapist who specialized in obsessive behaviors. His first appointment was already scheduled. He also agreed to transparency with all purchases and to discuss any new interests before acting on them. His siblings volunteered to help monitor his progress. The dog cautiously approached him, tail wagging slightly. He petted it gently, and I saw him really look at our pet for the first time in weeks. He'd been so focused on bees, he'd barely acknowledged the actual animal in our house. The dog licked his hand and settled at his feet. We worked out a trial arrangement. He could come home, but the shed remained off off limits, and I controlled the finances temporarily. Any new hobby had to be approved by both me and his therapist. It felt like treating a child, but after the honeycomb to beehive pipeline, I needed safeguards. The first week was rough. I caught him browsing aquaponics forums twice. He'd started watching documentaries about sustainable farming, but each time he caught himself and told me about it. The therapist said this was progress, recognizing the pattern before acting on it. Robert returned the bee supplies, and we sold everything online together. The money went toward repairing the damage from his various disasters. He winced seeing the hive boxes go to another buyer, but didn't protest. The dog supervised the sales, as if making sure everything really left. His coworkers had apparently been concerned about his behavior too. His boss called to check in, mentioning the strange bee-themed presentations my husband had been giving during meetings. We added workplace behavior to his therapy goals. He needed to keep his obsessions from affecting his job. One evening, I found him in the garage looking at the empty space where he'd stored hive parts, but instead of seeming sad, he looked thoughtful. He told me the therapist had helped him realize he was trying to fill some void with these intense hobbies. The dog joined him, and they sat together quietly. We started taking walks together in the evening, all three of us. It gave him something to do with his restless energy. He'd point out different flowers and mention which ones bees preferred, but he'd catch himself before launching into lectures. The dog loved the new routine. Catherine visited to apologize again for her father's role. My husband apologized to her for harassing her father with calls. She mentioned her dad had actually felt bad for him, recognizing the obsessive behavior. Her father had gone through something similar with orchid growing in his youth. Slowly, things normalized. The house was fully repaired. My husband attended therapy twice a week. He joined a hiking group to channel his energy into something that didn't require major purchases or property modifications. The dog came along on the hikes, finally getting proper exercise. 3 months later, he showed me a certificate from his therapy program. He completed the first phase of treatment for obsessive behavior patterns. We celebrated with dinner at a normal restaurant, not Taco Bell. He even cooked a simple meal the next day without destroying the kitchen. The shed remained locked, now holding just normal garden tools. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at it, but he never asked for the key. His therapist had helped him understand that the shed represented his need to create secret spaces for his obsessions. Keeping it locked was symbolic. His family stayed involved, checking in regularly. His sister joked that at least his obsessions were legal, unlike their cousin who'd become fixated on street racing. We could laugh about it now, though the humor was tinged with caution. The pattern was managed, not cured. One day, I came home to find him teaching the dog a new trick. He'd researched dog training but hadn't bought any equipment or tried to transform our yard into an agility course. He was just spending time with our pet, enjoying the simple interaction. Real progress. The bee incident became a turning point. Friends who'd initially taken his side apologized when they learned the full extent of his deception. Tom felt especially guilty for enabling him. We rebuilt those relationships carefully, with new boundaries in place. As our anniversary approached, I wondered if we'd make it. The therapy was working, but trust takes time to rebuild. He surprised me by planning a simple dinner at home. No grand gestures or new obsessions. Just us and the dog, eating a meal he'd cooked without destroying anything. He gave me a card with a handwritten note acknowledging the chaos he'd caused. No excuses about his childhood or his dreams, just ownership and a promise to keep working on himself. The dog tried to eat the envelope, bringing some lightness to the moment. Looking back, the honeycomb incident was the beginning of the end of our old pattern. His digestive disaster had led to an obsession that finally pushed things too far, but it also led to him getting help. Sometimes you need to hit rock bottom, even if that bottom is covered in beeswax and Taco Bell. We're still together, still working on things. The dog is thriving with all the attention and walks. The house is intact, and my husband hasn't developed any new obsessions, so I keep the shed locked just in case. Trust but verify, especially when your partner once ate enough honeycomb to become a human gas factory.